Okay, so hello everyone, welcome to today's webinar with the George Washington University and Apporto. We really appreciate you all joining us. We hope you'll enjoy the upcoming discussions on moving virtual desktops to the cloud. So before we get started with the introductions, let me just share a quick overview of our agenda for this session. So today's webinar will take the format of a discussion panel, and we're very grateful to be joined by Jared Johnson and Adil Hassan from George Washington University, who will be talking about their journey from on-premise VDI to the cloud. And along the way, we'll be asking Jared and Adil to talk about their first-hand experience of migrating to desktop as a service in the cloud and what prompted that switch from existing legacy VDI. We'll also ask about how they evaluated the various solutions and how they navigated the process of change at their institution to successfully deliver results and an awesome new service for their students and faculty. And if you'd like to pose your own questions along the way, feel free to type those into the chat, and we'll aim to work those questions into the discussion as we go along. And as I said, we'll also have dedicated time for Q&A towards the end of today's session as well. So for those of you who don't know me, I'm Phil Morgan. I'm Managing Director for Apporto in the UK. I've been working in global EdTech for the past 10 years now, and for 10 years before that, I worked at Lancaster University here in the UK. It's my pleasure to introduce you to our speakers today. And so first of all, I'd like to ask Jared Johnson to introduce himself.
Hello, everyone. My name is Jared Johnson. I serve as the Associate Vice President for Academic Technology and Customer Experience, as well as Digital Transformation at George Washington University in Washington, D.C., in the United States of America. I've been here with the university in academic technology space for nearly 19 years now. And the areas that I lead fall into this area of academic computing, as well as audiovisual design and engineering for all of our different learning spaces on campus. And then I also lead a digital transformation consulting team that's working across the university to really chart our future digital strategy for the digital enterprise here at GW. Very pleased to be here.
Fantastic, Jared. Thank you again. And Adil.
Hello, everyone. Adil Hassan, Director of Academic and Virtual Computing. I report up to Jared Johnson, and I've been at GW just about 15 years. Prior to that, I was at Georgetown University, specifically at their law center, managing their network and server infrastructure. At GW, in my current role, essentially, my portfolio includes managing endpoint devices. We have about roughly 10,000 physical endpoints that range from employee devices, classroom computers, computer labs, conference spaces. Portfolio also includes the delivery of software applications, both for physical and virtual footprint. That includes license management and licensing compliance. My team also manages the virtual desktop computing environment for two purposes, for the academic and administrative side. And we also manage a few student-facing services such as 3D printing, cloud printing, and student computing areas. Very excited to be here, and thank you.
Thank you, Adil. We're excited to have you as well, so thank you very much. And last but certainly not least, Anthony, please take it away.
Yeah, thank you, Phil. Thank you all for joining us on this session today. We're really excited to share this great case study with George Washington University. But first, let me tell you a little bit about Apporto. Next slide, please, Phil. So Apporto is relatively a young company and started in 2014 in Palo Alto, California, which is the heart of Silicon Valley. And what we learned during the initial stages of the formation of the company is that even though there were quite a few virtualization solutions, whether they're cloud-based or on-prem based, what universities told us is that none of those solutions focused on the needs of higher education. So we decided to really understand the unique requirements of higher education, and we built a solution around those requirements. And I must say the market has responded very well to our offering. We have 200 universities here in North America who are our customers. We have a couple in the UK that Phil is working on. And we hope as a result of our entry in the UK market, we're going to be able to partner with more universities to help them understand the value of our solution. We over the course of the years, we've made several innovations. So not only we deliver Windows virtual desktops, we deliver Mac virtual desktops, which can be very handy for universities who train on iOS programming. We also deliver Linux virtual desktops, all from the same platform. We deliver modular cyber labs. Cybersecurity is a very hot topic in the United States. I'm sure it's a very hot topic in the UK, and we have a unique offering in that area. And finally, secure employee access. Obviously, there is a lot of work from home going on. I presume this is the case also in the UK. And the challenge that many universities face is, how do I provide access to my employees, or maybe even to my contractors, to resources on-prem without exposing my network to insecurities coming from outside the network? So with that, I'm going to hand it over back to Jared, who's going to tell us more about George Washington University.
Thanks, Anthony. So the George Washington University, located in the heart of our nation's capital in Washington, D.C. We also have two other full campuses and two additional graduate centers here in the Washington, D.C. area. Overall, we have about 10,000 undergraduates and then 17,000 graduate professional students in various programs. We have 10 different schools at the university. And as I kind of talk about some of our story, as Phil prompts me throughout our conversation, we'll talk about how we've really moved from a very decentralized decision-making to more of a centralized support model over about a 10-year process in which we've been dealing with virtualization and virtual labs. So back to you, Phil.
Fantastic, Joe. Thank you again. Okay, so as we move on into our panel discussion, I think what I'm going to do is just stop presenting, and then you can all see our speakers on the screen. And I'm perhaps going to ask Anthony if he could get us started with the first question to Jared and Adil.
Sure thing. Thank you. So Jared and Adil, you guys have been with VDI for quite a while. If I remember correctly, probably about 10 years ago. You've been with VDI for about 10 years. Tell us a little bit, how did you get started with VDI, and why did you get started with VDI in the first place? Maybe Jared, you can help us with that question.
Sure, yeah. It's probably been about 15 years now since we really started our efforts around server virtualization, and it was through that process and virtualizing most of our servers for different academic technology deliveries that we started to turn toward, okay, how could we look at using VMware Horizon on premises to start delivering virtual desktop infrastructure to our lab computers. And that's where we started. And just for some background, so you kind of have understanding of our physical environment that we support, we have about 450 classrooms across all those 5 different locations that have a presenter instructor workstation in them. And then we have around 46 computer lab or open computing commons areas for students with about 1,300 computers, and those range from mainly Windows and Mac. I think there's 1 or 2 Linux labs in our engineering school. That footprint used to be a lot larger when we started this process. There were certainly many more courses that required a computer lab experience. As we saw more students coming to campus with their own laptops and things, we started to evaluate, how can we shrink this physical infrastructure? And so that effort to get into VDI, we started kind of looking in our computing commons areas. We were a little wary about getting into scheduled labs where instruction was taking place. And so we started delivering there. That went well. And so then we started getting into the more of the scheduled labs. In particular, remember there was one, a nursing lab for the nursing school where they did a lot of their exams and things. And right away we started to run into some issues with, the experience was a little bit different than an open lab where people are coming at various times and logging in. When we had 60 people all logging in and kind of all following the same pace of an exam, we started to run into a lot of performance issues that we hadn't seen before. And it was very tricky to kind of figure out, was that due to networking? Was it due to the server side? We felt like we had built out the right level of infrastructure to serve the number of machines that we needed. And so at the time, just to make sure we weren't running into issues, it was like, okay, double the infrastructure, and then we'll continue to work that out. Around 2014, our School of Public Health was building a brand new building here on our campus, and brand new, beautiful building. And they were going to be doing a lot of GIS instruction, and yet they didn't want to use precious real estate for a computer lab. So they came to us and said, we would like to, we hear this thing, that there are virtual computer labs. Can we look at that? So we looked at our VDI VMware infrastructure and said, okay, I think we could do this with you. This is a pilot, fingers crossed, here we go. And that process, again, around 2014, was fairly smooth. Again, we still had some of the same issues when it came to everyone pulling their laptops out at one time and doing the same process. But overall, that went fairly well because we saw most of the usage was distributed across the campus. And quickly we learned a few things. I mean, one would be that I think this is very different than like employee access virtual computing, where you might see more consistent everyday usage. We see the patterns are very very connected and driven by that academic assignments, and very low, and then that assignment is due, and everyone's trying to hit it at one time. So we worked through some of those challenges, trying to understand overall how what's our model going to be in terms of number of concurrent users as compared to number of students in the course, and then maybe a year or two into Apporto's existence, we had heard about that, and I'll certainly let Adil talk more about what that looked like when we were evaluating different platforms.
So yeah, Adil, thank you very much, Jared. But Adil, tell us a little bit so you had gone through all the growing pains of installing and standing up a VMware, maybe even also Citrix environments. Maybe you can tell us a little bit about the various environments. What drove you to look into a new environment, a cloud environment?
Sure. So I think I just want to add a couple of things to Jared's response earlier. One of the other drivers was the complexity with deploying software. And with a virtual environment, it was very easy to update a single image and being able to push that out to all the various clones. So it simplified our software delivery a lot. Now, as far as what kind of drove us to look at cloud, I think Jared touched on a few of those, which was the on-prem environment always had challenges with troubleshooting issues. So anytime a ticket came in, it was very difficult to pinpoint whether that was the end user's device, whether it was their network that they were connected to at that time, off campus, on campus, whether that was the application servers that were responsible for delivering the application, and it could be also the software. So that created a lot of complexity for our help desk staff to be able to narrow down and quickly resolve issues. The other piece also was the student experience, and that, but by that I mean when a new student wanted to access the virtual computing environment, they had to meet a certain set of prerequisites. And that included making sure that they had the VPN software installed. And then after that, they needed the player or the desktop client in order to be able to connect to the virtual instance. And those two, while they may sound very simple, they created a number of challenges for students that maybe didn't have the administrative privileges to be able to install those pieces of software. Because we're in the heart of DC, there were certain students that had laptops issued by their organization, they're at work, and they were trying to utilize that device to access the computing environment, and that created a challenge. The other piece was also in terms of troubleshooting issues, as well as the software delivery. Like Jared said, there were capacity issues. So when you have 60 to 100 students trying to log in at once, then you need to make sure you have enough resources to be able to provide a VM with enough performance for a good user experience. That was another driver for looking at cloud. I think the other piece also was being able to troubleshoot, not necessarily troubleshoot, but the scaling up. So when we had a fall semester starting, there was a high demand, and because we were invested on the physical hardware, compute resources, storage resources, well, they had a cap. So when we would experience a semester where we had more demand than what our physical footprint could handle, well, we wouldn't be able to quickly turn around and handle that demand. On the other side, when it was the summer semester, when the demand kind of dropped, well, now you have invested in this very expensive piece of hardware, and you're not utilizing it at the capacity that you had planned. So that was another driver for moving to the cloud, where you could quickly upscale and downscale your instances.
Excellent. Yes, we hear that all the time. There is increasingly demand by universities for maybe research computing, maybe high demand computing, like you said, ArcGIS Pro. And the problem with that is if you have one course that's running a year, should you be buying the hardware and the GPU, which is very, very expensive, as you know, to support that one course that's taking place a year? So obviously the cloud provides a lot more flexibility than having on-prem hardware. But perhaps now, Jared, if I can go back to you, Tell us, so now you identified that there perhaps are some solutions in the cloud around some of the problems you were experiencing. Tell us about the discovery process, the selection process, if you don't mind, and how you eventually landed on Apporto.
Sure. So when I was giving the introduction of GW, I talked about when we started this, we were a very distributed, decentralized group. So at one point we had a different IT unit in each of our 10 schools, and then there was a central academic technologies team that I ran, and then there was a central kind of back-end IT, central IT group. And we had various different virtualization efforts going on across those different areas. So from a central services perspective, I described how we were working in the VMware Horizon space. Our central IT group was also distributing some virtualized experience for our accounting software and things like that via a different VMware experience. And then a few of our various schools had different needs. Our School of Arts and Sciences was starting to distribute software via Citrix environment, mainly for geography, a GIS lab, as well as things like MATLAB and Mathematica and some of the other software titles that we all kind of experience. And so at that point, there really wasn't a university requirement to be working together. So it was a very disparate experience if you were a student that might be multidisciplinary and therefore taking courses across different schools. And hey, I thought I did virtual this way and that way. So fast forward to now, we're about 3 years past a centralization effort where we brought all of our IT together under one leadership. So over the last 3 years, we've been really working on a consolidation effort, because during that 10-year span, there were multiple flavors. There was some schools using Citrix, as I said, some schools using Amazon workspaces. There were a central effort with Apporto, and then we were also working through a kind of inter-university agreement with offering Apporto to our public health school and our engineering school. And so Adil has had the joy and headache of dealing with all this consolidation, but I'll go back to him and let him talk about kind of, maybe 5 years back, how we got from on-prem VMware Horizon to Apporto.
Yep, thanks, Jared. So when it came down to evaluation criteria and why we went in a certain direction with cloud, we looked at all the big players, Microsoft Azure, AWS Workspaces, Citrix. Some of these, like Jared said, were already in existence in our environment, as well as Apporto. And our evaluation criteria included, we wanted our users to have a good experience. We wanted to remove as many barriers to connectivity as possible, like I talked about earlier about the different software installation requirements. So that experience, the interface needed to be user-friendly, intuitive. We wanted to make sure that the account provisioning process was smooth, not just for the faculty member or the students, but also for the IT staff. And then we wanted to cast a wide net, as wide as possible, to support as many devices that students are bringing in, all the different flavors of operating system, browsers, mobile devices, different formats. So that was one of the key criteria as well. Another piece was the licensing model. Cost played a factor in it. So at that time, there were, you had your pay-as-you-go model, you had a fixed cost model, locking you into a multi-year agreement for something we weren't sure how it was going to play out. Then you had concurrent users as well as, based on devices or number of users that you had at the institution. The other piece was implementation and support. So we wanted to, some of the options we looked at, their implementation was more, okay, here's a product, here's some training videos, here's a demo, and pretty much self-service to get you started. And they were more focused towards faculty members who kind of wanted to, requiring the faculty member to kind of configure and stand up those virtual labs. And we wanted to, just like students, we wanted to remove as much burden off our faculty as possible, so they didn't have to worry about the configuration of the virtual lab, focus more on teaching and learning aspect. So implementation was very important, as well as support. So not just support during the implementation, but after we went live, we needed the support to stand behind us. So with some of the solution, it was, okay, you pretty much have your knowledge base article, or call in and put in a ticket, and you spin the wheel on which technician you're going to get that day for helping you with your request. So we wanted to have a vendor where we can build a long-term relationship, who kind of understood our environment, our business needs, and we didn't have to kind of rehearse all over from the start of what our environment was about. We wanted to just quickly get to the problem or the task at hand. So those were very important criterias. And then lastly, in terms of the selection criteria, the experience of the solution that we were looking at, we wanted to make sure that it would fit in our higher education environment. And some of the solutions that we looked at were more, and this is, by the way, pre-pandemic, so they were more focused toward corporate environment, remote employees, and not necessarily in a teaching and learning capacity. So those kind of were our criterias. And if I can take a few more minutes, I want to mention why we kind of ended up with Apporto. What kind of set that decision apart from others, and that was just the capabilities in teaching and learning. So some of the capabilities was you could have a student quickly generate a link that they could share and with a faculty member who can, log into their session, see what they're doing, and assist, all in real time. That was very important for us because we had librarians that offer tutoring services, one-on-one consultation, and this capability was very important for them. The other piece was faculty having some analytics on students' usage of the virtual computing environment, and students having the ability to start off with a clean slate, create a snapshot, do whatever exercise they're doing, and if they screwed up, they can quickly roll back to a clean state and do over. So very, very important capabilities in a teaching and learning environment that didn't kind of exist in other platforms. Other piece was single sign-on. We wanted to make sure that, like I said, account provisioning was important. File upload, download capabilities, because these were persistent desktops, the data was important. We didn't want students to be struggling in bringing in their data into the virtual computing environment to be able to interact with. So Apporto had multiple options. You had persistent storage. You had shared storage where a faculty member could create folders to dump their learning material for students to grab. From there, they had a solution called Cloud Mounter that allowed you to link up Google Drive, Box, Dropbox, whatever, all those different flavors out there in a single kind of interface that was persistent. And then another piece that also kind of set apart was, we had invested a lot in on-prem license servers that were only accessible through VPN. And putting everything in the cloud, well, now we had a challenge of, well, how does a student check out a license from a server that's behind the university firewalls? So we worked on creating a VPN tunnel that allowed that capability for students to have that access. And just a couple of more things here. One was another important capability was a lot of the students, when they would complain about the experience that they were having, most of the time it ended up being they weren't on a very stable or reliable Wi-Fi connection. So there was an ability to quickly look at the network meter. I'm not sure what the official term is, but it gave you bars of how strong of a signal you had. And that kind of helps self-troubleshoot a lot of the issues by moving to a different place and get a better signal. I already mentioned the ability to quickly spin up, spin down, and that was based on course schedule. So we're utilizing our dollars, as efficiently as possible. And then finally, the skill set that we got from the engineers at Apporto, because they were dealing with all the different institutions like ours, they had the experience in working with special software that's only used in medicine, medical school, or engineering school. So that skill set was very hard to find, but it was very valuable because it reduced our deployment time because they were already familiar with it. They could help us deploy that. So that was a major benefit and kind of a separation from some of the other options that we had.
Fantastic. Antti, you're muted if you're going to step in there.
Thank you. Thank you. Adil, I think you covered all the features, functionality of our products. So I thank you very, very much for that. So obviously you mentioned something that's very, apropos, which is the pandemic. So, the pandemic struck obviously, and I think luckily you guys were already kind of enabled in the cloud. So tell us a little bit, how were you able to pivot from what you had and leverage Apporto during the pandemic? Maybe we can start with Jared and maybe Adil.
Yeah, like I said, we had been in Apporto for maybe 2.5, 3 years or so with a few of our schools prior to the global pandemic. But that being the case, we had the experience with the company, and right when things kind of shut down here in March 2020, we had some of these other IT directors that were leading their own kind of school IT reaching out to us. One of them, the first one was kind of the engineering school. We had been, evangelizing a move to a shared VDI approach for many years, but it certainly took a global pandemic to kind of wake everyone up to the need to kind of work together. So I think there was a really quick turnaround that we did in terms of getting a particular engineering lab. I think it was a CAD lab that they needed spun up. Many of our programs, initially were able to allow for remote desktop sessions. No one was on campus, so you could turn the whole lab into a remote desktop farm, if you will. But students did run into some experience issues with that. So certainly for a few of the programs, it was a quick, easy, like no extra cost way of providing it. But in the end, we did find more need, and I think it was, and I'm sure like this at many of your institutions, the pandemic helped to highlight the digital equity issues here on campus. We tend to be a very wealthy institution. It's a very expensive private school. And yet there, even though the percentage is small, there's probably 5 to 10% of students that are here and do not have the same kind of economic means. And the library used to serve as that, gap filler. We have plenty of student computing in the library, and students who didn't have appropriate computing for their particular degree didn't have to worry about it. They just spent a lot of time here. So when they could no longer access here, our student affairs started getting, we called them CARES reports, but hey, I need help. I need some funds to try to get a device. And so they were coming to us like, can you help us get laptops out to these students? And, this allowed us to really think about like, one, we still had to spend money to get laptops out to those students or some type of device, but we didn't have to focus on such a high performance level because we knew, they really just needed that browser access and all of the computing performance for whatever academic pursuit they were doing was going to be on the server side. And so it was kind of through that effort and partnering with student affairs and the different schools that we really started to be able to build that vision for kind of a unified approach. And then it was during the pandemic that the university decided to, we're already in chaos. Why don't we do a centralization and move to shared services? And so through that effort, now Adil was leading the team that was responsible for all of these different environments. And so we knew very quickly we had to develop plans to kind of consolidate in terms of the platforms we were using. So, I think that the pandemic obviously highlighted for students ways that they wanted to experience technology differently after the pandemic. So I spoke about remote access, and we have a school of art and design. It's located in a historic museum building, and it's about 5 blocks off the central part of campus. And there are a number of design labs in there. And during the pandemic, all those computers were, able to be remote. Students could remotely access those computers. But when we came back from our year away, we could no longer serve those up from a remote desktop perspective. So we just, the program director said, sorry, you have to come back to the lab. And the students had a bit of a revolt. The dean, the leader of the school, was getting messages about, it's not safe for me to be walking in the middle of the night 5 blocks or something. I don't understand why I was able to access this from California on the other side of the United States, but I can't do it here. And so that helped also to really turn the attention of our administrators across campus about, the needs for continuing remote. Even if we are really a place-based institution, we want our students to be here. We wanted them to be engaging with each other, but we've all learned to do things differently. And, the student doesn't want to have to go to the computer lab at 2 in the morning to finish that project. They want to be able to do it from their room. And that's a continuing kind of effort, and we'll continue to kind of work to figure out where physical labs still make sense. Adil and I have an ongoing conversation in our School of Engineering with their faculty computing committee, and we're looking at things like, okay, they used to have some studio labs where it was kind of group-based active learning, and they used to have laptops that they distributed to the tables, and there's just a lot of effort that went into keeping those laptops even just charged, right, and getting them out. And so without being too pushy and allowing the faculty members to really think about their pedagogy, we don't want to be forcing that on them. We've been able to point them to the experience of the pandemic and think about how, we don't have to invest in those really expensive laptops that don't get used most of the week. Let's start to think about how maybe we have a few loaners for students who don't have their own device in class. but let's look at moving virtual. It's funny because here they are, computer science faculty, and weren't really too aware of these types of service offerings. That they came to us and said, we're thinking about putting a server in the server room, and then we'll figure out some type of user interface for students to be able to access it. And like, we've got a product, and we actually already have labs that we're distributing to this very school. Here you go. Here's a link. Try it out. And they're like, mind blown, right? So, so that's been good. We look really good because we already have a solution for them. But we'll continue to kind of work through that to figure out the best mix of physical versus virtual, and a lot of that gets down to what type of experience are you trying to have, or who are you trying to cover in terms of access to computing.
Fantastic, Jared. Thank you. I'm just going to step in quickly. I see you on mute there, but one of the questions that came through in the chat was, and you kind of touched on this there in terms of how you're using the solution today in the mix of how you do things on campus now that the students have returned. And you talked about things like loan laptops. Do you use any kind of fixed endpoints in labs and open access areas to connect to Apporto as well? Is it mostly BYO, or what does that kind of mixture look like?
So historically we haven't, but that's really what we're starting to look at, especially with the engineering faculty as we're talking about. Historically, it was kind of two separate things: our remote access versus on-prem physical labs. But again, we're trying to convince them that we can have a mix, right? Like, we don't have to. We see very low usage of these large computer labs outside of maybe a few time bands. For example, many of our different graduate student programs have a statistics requirement, and there's a lab that goes along with that. And they all tend to take like early evening classes. And so there's a band of time between like, late afternoon and early evening that all of our computer labs are engaged, and then the rest of the week no one's in there, right? So let's think about the conversations that we have are kind of like, let's think about thinning down the number. We don't need a computer per person in the class. Maybe there's a quarter of the computers, or even less, 10% there for someone who doesn't have handy access to their own. Most people want to join from the comfort of their own machine. And if we're thinking about kind of deploying the software in a virtual space, the same experience that they have in the class can be had on university-owned property and the student property. But then as the student leaves, they can access that on their iPad or whatever device they have at home.
There was a related question. Do you have your remote VMs joined? So in the case, what I can tell you is that in the case of George Washington, we don't have domain joined, but in the case of other customers, we have domain joined. And if that's important to you, Kevin is the gentleman who asked this question. Obviously, we can accommodate that. I wanted to pick. Go ahead.
And Anthony, I'm sorry, I was just going to add there that even though our endpoints, our VMs are not domain joined, we are utilizing Azure AD for the single sign-on component. So from a user experience, it's streamlined that they utilize their same login for the rest of the university resources, and they are presented with the desktop or the app store as soon as they get past the single sign-on.
And in fact, one more thing, there's a couple of ways to interpret your question, Kevin. But one way I could interpret it is that, is it possible for students to access on-prem physical endpoints through Apporto? And the answer is absolutely yes. And we do have many customers who do that. They do that. Maybe they have, medical devices that are attached to a computer. Maybe they have Apple, Apple computers that they want to make available to their students remotely. And this is all possible, and with a very simple UI, the student logs in, as Adil mentioned, through a single sign-on or through the learning management system, clicks launch, and now through the browser, he has access to the on-prem PC or the on-prem Mac. And so we only have a few more minutes before we open to the Q&A. I'm having a problem here with my smoke detector. Phil, if you don't mind taking it from here.
Yeah, absolutely. I think what was really nice about what you said, Adil and Jared, earlier on is you very much seem to have focused around the user experience and the importance of having that great user experience for the students. And you talked about things like not needing the client and not needing to have VPN. I think the other part of Kevin's question was maybe around VPN access to things like license servers. And I think you touched on that, Adil. I know that we put in an IPsec tunnel between the Apporto cloud and campus to get access to those license servers, obviously, so it's easy for the students. They just log in and use it in the normal way. You also talked a little bit at the beginning about things like having access to the resources when they're needed. I wonder, Adil, do you know, have you used the scheduling features in Apporto for things like that to make sure that, you know, desktops are available for class when they're needed?
Yes, absolutely. So what we have, the way our environment is currently configured is we have different desktops for each school. So we have a public health desktop, a business school, engineering, et cetera, et cetera. And those are throughout the day or the week, they are open for anybody to access those if they have permission or if they've been granted access as part of enrolling on in a specific course. We also have another model where the desktop is wide open throughout the week, but when there's a scheduled course that's about to happen, anybody who's not enrolled in that course, they will get a pop-up saying, you know, this resource needs to be reassigned for somebody who's re-enrolled in a specific course. So it kind of helps you utilize your subscription more effectively for times that the courses are happening, and then wide open when there aren't any classes happening, similar to a physical lab experience. And then we also have a general VM or desktop where you don't have to be part of any school. As long as you're active, you have a university account, you can get in and fire up a virtual desktop with all the basic applications that you as a student are entitled to. Now, you might be concerned about, well, what if there's too many people that log in? And in order to control costs and avoid any overages, there is a cap that we have based on, you know, that funding that year. So we put a cap so that we can only allow enough connections that meets our budget for that year. So
fantastic, that makes perfect sense. So excellent. So we're coming into the last 10 minutes. So we did promise that we would take some time to field questions from all the attendees today. So if you do have a question, you know, anything that we've not covered or anything you'd like to hear a little bit further information from Jared and Adil, do feel free to post that into the chat, and we'll take the time to ask those questions now. If there are no questions, I'm sure that Anthony and I can think of some more. So we'll jump in.
Phil, I have just a quick direction. I thought it might be helpful for us to just say, you know, what would you do differently? Or, you know, what are you thinking about kind of from a next steps? And getting back to our story, when we started very decentralized and we were serving particular universities for particular schools at our university for particular needs, that led to even in Apporto, as Adil was just explaining, broken up, you know, a desktop experience for business, a desktop experience for engineering, and across our now our One IT, we have a strong focus on really extending our resource reach. If we're investing in something, how can we have the most number of people use this as opposed to, you know, just people in this segment of the university? And so to that end, we are rethinking our strategy, trying to define some groupings. So, we have similar use cases in our public health school as we do in our geography program around GIS, right? And then there are some other software that might not be in that GIS space, but they have similar performance needs. And so thinking through overall from a total university landscape, like how many resources how many desktops at this performance level versus another performance level, and again, how can we make sure that as we're investing, as many people are using it as possible. Adil, you might want to speak to that just in a little more detail.
I'm sorry, Jared. So this is around the access.
So from looking forward, how we're kind of re-architecting how we create that.
Yep. So thank you. And I also see a question in the chat that I will touch on in terms of some of the pain point. Because we have the various different desktops per school, there's additional administrative overhead in managing duplication of software across these different desktops. So if there's let's say a new version of SPSS that comes out, now you have to update each one of those desktops. And as Jared was mentioning, if we were to do this again, Apporto has introduced something called a desktop variant that we're very excited about, because I think it will help tackle some of the pain points we have right now. Where you can create a base layer of all the applications, and then you can create different kind of views for the different schools. And then you can also go further and you can group them into the different performance needs. So if there's a graphics sort of suite of software or a medium tier set of applications, you could sort of create those tiers and grant access based on the need rather than a school affiliation. The other pain point, not pain point, but more of an improvement is right now when we have a course and we need to grant access, we have to upload the roster in order to grant access. There is an option where we can automate that whole workflow by integrating the course information through our banner or student information system and connecting that into Apporto. So that way, when we have late registration or late drops, the changes is almost real time or overnight, whatever that schedule sync is taking place, so that there isn't a manual intervention by a support staff to be able to update that roster or grant access.
Right. Thank you, Adil. There's a couple of questions that probably are directed towards Apporto. And of course, I am biased, but I'm going to answer those questions. So how affordable is the solution, and is there a minimum size for a pilot? We offer what we think is a very inexpensive pilot, $2,500. And for the $2,500, we'll set you up with what looks like a fully production environment, in the sense that we would have to, we set up the site-to-site VPN, we do the SSO integration or the LMS integration, the VLE integration in the UK. And we set you up with a number of virtual desktops, so your students, your faculty can kick the tires and give you feedback on their experience. And we also have a tool. Our price list is in fact an Excel spreadsheet, so you can plug in some numbers and come up with cost estimates. Since our pricing is based on concurrent users, most universities are very familiar with the concept of concurrent users, because if you think about it, a physical computer lab is really concurrent users, right? How many seats do you need in a computer lab? So we use a similar approach for our pricing. Adil, perhaps, do you want to say anything about our pricing, since obviously my perspective is somewhat biased?
Yeah, I think I'll just add there that there are different tiers. So, if you have applications that are just for courses that are, introductory level 101, you don't have to, get a VM that has a lot of computing power. So, Apporto does allow you to adjust your VM resources based on the size of the application. And if you're not sure, for example, what tier of VM do you want to utilize, they all do offer consulting options. So based on their data from other universities for that specific piece of software, they can recommend what is the appropriate tier for that specific need.
Excellent, thank you, Adil. I should just add to Anthony's note about the cost of pilots as well, that for those in the UK that don't want to pay in US dollars, we do work with partners in the UK, so we can also quote and supply, under the various frameworks that are available here to make that procurement easy as well. And then I think we've probably just got a few minutes. We might just have time to ask one more of the questions that came in the chat. So Lee asked about major benefits from a cybersecurity perspective. And also, has Apporto allowed you to tighten up security, but still have that flexibility for, academics and research and in teaching. Perhaps, Adil, do you want to take that one?
Yeah, so I can take the crack at it. So first of all, I think because we are shifting the environment into the cloud, we're removing the threats that might be present, with on-campus resources. So that by itself gives you some peace of mind that, if there is any kind of impact, it's kind of limited to an off-campus environment. The other piece is that there is a lot of flexibility we offer for academic purposes. We're not utilizing Apporto for our research needs because we have a separate team that kind of handles high performance computing needs. But from an academic standpoint, there's a ton of flexibility in terms of the capabilities, the features, and whatever the faculty member is just out to do. So without compromising security in that sense.
Excellent.
Thanks, and I'll also just follow up the next question about any sort of thin clients. We do not use any thin clients. We're kind of shifting towards the BYOD model, since a lot of the students already have devices that they bring into the university. And if they do not, as Jared mentioned, we do have some loaner device program for those use cases.
Perfect. That's great. And I was just going to add very briefly to Lee's question. We do offer the Cyber Labs environment that Anthony mentioned early in the presentation. We do offer the ability for students in that environment to have root access on a Linux desktop so that they can do all the kinds of things that need to be done, in teaching in computer science and cybersecurity type courses. So, if that's something that's challenging, to do on a campus network, it's something that's much easier for us to do in the cloud at Apporto. Okay, excellent. So I'm just going to round up. Let me just screen share again, and we can just finish up now as we're coming up to the hour. So lastly, just to say, if you enjoyed hearing about Jared and Adil's experience with Apporto today, and you'd like to see it for yourself, you can find out more information on our website at apporto.com, or drop me an email. I'll be happy to connect with you to answer any further questions, and of course we can arrange a demo if you'd like to see for yourself. We do offer pilots, and we are a true cloud native software service. So our typical time for customer onboarding is less than 2 weeks. So whether you have requirements to explore over the summer, or you need a solution for teaching in September, now is the time to move, and we will be able to help you. But lastly, and certainly not least, I'd like to say a very big thanks to our guest speakers today. Jared, Adil, it's really been a pleasure to hear from your experience. I think on behalf of everybody here, I want to thank you so much for joining us. Anthony, a big thank you to you too, and also to the wider Apporto team and our partners at UCISA for all their help in organising today's webinar. We'd like to wish you a very pleasant evening here in the UK. Have a lovely rest of your day in the US, and we hope to hear from you again soon. Take care, everyone, and thank you again.
Thank you.